Gold has been a symbol of wealth throughout much of human history. Its ability to resist corrosion has allowed it to ascend to symbolism of immortality and power in ancient cultures. It's managed to stick around as a source of value throughout many different civilizations. Even today, as we have moved away from the gold standard, it still holds its place in society. We craft it into our prized possessions like wedding rings and other jewelry, or into our electronics as an excellent conductor of electricity. Gold doesn't seem to be going anywhere, and neither is its value within our societies. But many have done treacherous things in pursuit of the shiny metal. Today, we're going to be looking into one of those cases. A time when two men were willing to risk throwing the United States economy into disarray for a chance at getting all the gold they could. This gold wasn't in the ground, however. It was all in the markets. So throw your shovels and picks aside as we learn something new. In 1869, the US essentially had two forms of currency, gold and greenbacks. Greenbacks were paper money, pretty much like we have today. But this type had come into existence during the Civil War, which had ended just 4 years earlier. See, before the Civil War, all money was based upon gold and silver. Paper money wasn't really used as we use it today. All of the US's finances and the federal budget were tied to the amount of precious metals in circulation. But the Civil War became too expensive to finance on gold alone. So the government went into debt and started printing paper money. Because they printed them with green ink, they earned the nickname greenbacks. But even after the Civil War ended, millions of pieces of this green paper remained in circulation. And the newly elected President Ulysses S. Grant wanted to get rid of them completely and return the US to a single currency based upon gold and silver. So the government began buying up wartime bonds with gold, paying down the national debt and reducing the supply of greenbacks in circulation. As a result, the amount of gold in circulation increased. This made it relatively cheap. In the years since the Civil War, speculating on the prices of gold had become a lucrative activity. There was an entire room in New York dedicated to the buying and selling of gold, aptly called the Gold Room. Inside the Gold Room was a huge fountain with a Cupid statue as its centerpiece. Wherever the Cupid's arrow pointed, that was the current price of gold. Just like any other commodity, as you increase the supply of gold, its value decreases. So the government flooding the market with cheap gold gave a shrewd investor the opportunity to buy up large amounts of it, which could lead to someone cornering the market. And that's just what Jim Fisk and Jay Gould did. Fisk was a stockbroker who made much of his fortune through smuggling and war profiteering. Gould, on the other hand, was a cutthroat railroad magnate and one of the richest men of his generation. So these two guys had the means and the appropriate lack of morals to leverage the gold market. Both Gould and Fisk worked for the Erie Railroad, one of the largest and busiest supply routes in the country at the time. Cheaper dollars drove down the price of commodities like grains, cheaper prices incentivized foreign countries to purchase from the United States, and since the US was largely an agricultural economy at the time, much of its commodities came from the bountiful Midwest. This meant that all those cheap goods had to be transported to the coast to be shipped overseas, and the only way to do that back in the day was by railroad. Now, if you own a significant percentage of any stock or product, you essentially decrease the available supply. Therefore, you can artificially increase the price. A rising price makes that product a valuable commodity to invest in, further inflating the price. In fact, if a commodity becomes too valuable, more people might be buying interest in said commodity than actually exists in the real world. At that point, a certain percentage of the commodity exists only in the imagination of the buyers. Nevertheless, the money is very real. This will continue to escalate until the corner is broken, either through the investors selling off their stake and making loads of money, or through the spontaneous and disastrous implosion of the financial markets. People had cornered the market in all kinds of products before, but nobody had ever cornered the market of gold. That is, until Gould and Fisk. But to successfully pull off their scheme, Gould and Fisk needed the cooperation of the federal government. Timing would have to be everything. Gould and Fisk had to buy up the gold when it was cheap, right after the government sold off its gold reserves, but they had to sell right before another gold dump. Fortunately, the Grant administration had very corrupt individuals within it. Gould and Fisk wormed their way into the social circles of Washington, and even managed to land themselves a meeting with the president himself. They tried to convince him that releasing the gold drove down the price of agricultural products and hurt farmers. Since farming was pretty much the only economic sector of the United States at the time, Grant's gold policy actually hurt the overall economy. Now, Grant wasn't really buying any of this. He listened to their arguments but didn't heed any of their advice. So Gould and Fisk would later bribe members of the government to tip them off to the next gold release. They put their scheme into effect on September 1st, 1869. That day, they bought up $1.5 million worth of gold, forcing the price up $4.50. That might not seem like much, but for every dollar increase in price, Gould and Fisk stood to make about 15 grand. Today, that would be over $250,000. Soon, Gould and Fisk began hoarding their gold, ensuring their corner on the gold market. By market close on September 22nd, they would have somewhere between $50 and $60 million worth of gold. This was about 3 times the amount of gold that actually resided in the vaults of New York City. Therefore, the price of gold continued to rise, provoking a frenzy of unbridled gold buying. President Grant eventually became aware of Gould and Fisk's schemes, but since he was a big believer in small government, he expected the invisible hand of the free market to slap some sense into them, so he did nothing about it. On the morning of Friday, September 24th, the day that would eventually be known as Black Friday, the price of gold jumped 10 points, eventually hitting $162 an ounce. Fisk was heard bragging, claiming that he could make it hit $200, and stirring up another round of frenzied buying, but it would never make it quite that far. After 2 weeks of frantic gold speculation and the invisible hand of the free market nowhere to be seen, Grant brought down the invisible boot of the federal government, dropping $4 million of gold into the market and squashing the price of gold. So, on Friday, September 24th, 1869, Gould and Fisk's corner on the gold market was broken, taking the rest of the economy with it. Investors, of course, panicked, pulling their money out of the plummeting stock market, and over the next few months, the nation's finances were in turmoil. Brokerages went bankrupt. The price of agricultural products were cut in half, devastating the farm sector, which, as mentioned earlier, was pretty much the entire economy. Most of all, people couldn't pay their taxes. At the time, taxes had to be paid in gold. With the price of gold having plummeted, many people didn't have enough money anymore to cover their taxes, which wasn't great for the federal budget either. It would be years before the US economy fully recovered. On the day of the crash, Gould and Fisk were nearly run down by an angry mob of gold speculators. They barely escaped by taking shelter in an opera house and calling in security from their railroad to keep the angry mob at bay. They would go on to escape further retribution by getting off after an investigation and trial without any form of punishment whatsoever. Years later, September 24th, 1869, would be named Black Friday. In the end, things wouldn't end well for Gould and Fisk, as Fisk ended up being shot and killed after a failed blackmailing attempt, and Gould was conned out of much of his money before moving out to the West Coast to start over, passing away just 20 years after Fisk. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you left a like below, and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. Thanks again, and I will see you next time.